Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the William Cuffay meeting tonight, the celebration of his 150th, anniversary of his death. My name is Councillor Lady Lola Oyewusi. I'm here tonight sharing with SAT. I will be taking the lead, and SAT would also be monitoring the Facebook page and also the messages, looking out for questions, and we will be taking your questions later on during the night, during the evening, as we go along. And please do bear with us. If your question is really urgent and we haven't really, get to you yet, just give us a nudge, repeat the question again, and somebody will pick it up. Tonight is all about William Cuffay. William Cuffay is the son of Chatham. He is a black man who made a real impact on working class people. And tonight we are going to be hearing quite a bit, about him from two of our speakers, and also a roundup from Steve Wilkins as well. So our first guest speaker tonight is Keith. That's Keith Flett. He is the convener for London Socialist Historian Group and the past president of Haringey Trade Union Council. So, over to you, Keith.
Thanks. That summed up my entire life in about 2 sentences. So that's right. I am the past president and secretary of Haringey Trade Council. I'm to the delegate. I actually work really as a trade union officer for Prospect. That means dealing with telecoms, BT. I also sit on the executive of BEC2, which is the linked union, which deals with entertainment, broadcasting, cinema. As many of you will know, it's a really tough time for people in those areas. Many of them are unemployed without any recourse to much money. I am the convener of the Socialist History Seminar at the Institute of Historical Research, London University School of Advanced Study, which is the centre of UK research history. And if you're interested, do have a look. They've got a very good website. Lots of it is interactive. Obviously, the building is still currently closed due to COVID. So, William Cuffay died on the 29th of July, 1870 in Tasmania. And he didn't go there voluntarily. Maybe quite a nice holiday destination now, but it wasn't in 1870. He was born, of course, in 1788 in an area of Gillingham. He was the son of a local woman who, albeit 2015 book suggests, was Juliana Fox. The father was a chef on a British Navy ship, former slave, which had obviously docked, I was thinking, Chatham. And that's an important point, which if I have time, I'll return to at the end, because the Royal Navy at that time, and indeed for decades before, had a very large population of black sailors, and numbers of them came to be resident in Britain, and were a substantial part of the black population in the country at this time. And there's some interesting things that flow from that historians have hardly touched on. So I may just touch on that again briefly at the end. So Cuffay was apprenticed as a tailor. He was a skilled craftsman. He moved to London, I think we presume because there was clearly more jobs available. We don't really know, but he was certainly in London by sort of 1814, 1815. And he became, by the 1830s, again, we don't know a great deal about his early life there. He became an active trade unionist, was involved in strike action around the time, same time as the Tolpuddle Martyrs, 1833, 1834. He wasn't apparently a fan of Robert Owen's Grand National Consolidated Trade Union. Nevertheless, he was involved with action. And then he went on, as the Chartist movement was formed in 1838, the Charter, 6 demands mainly around the vote for working men. He became set up the Metropolitan, i.e. London Chartist Tailors Association in 1839. So by that stage, he was getting on. For that time, he would have been 51 then, which is seriously old. People live that long, sadly, in many cases at that time. So he was already a senior figure, really, just by dint of age and the length of time that he'd been active as the Chartist movement started. And as we move into the 1840s, Cuffay takes on quite a senior role in the Chartist movement. He becomes in effect, I suppose, the secretary of the Chartist Land Association. Now, this is a kind of separate meeting in itself. But this is not a period when capitalism was necessarily thought to be permanent, as we now find it is at the minute, anyway. And the Chartists developed an idea that maybe we're about to opt out of industrial capitalism and build sort of agricultural settlements where people can live in ideal dwellings. And indeed, a number of these were built, none in Kent, but around the country they still exist. They're now hard to get hold of desirable properties in nice rural locations. But he was the secretary of that, and that was a significant undertaking. And it worried the state so much that, in fact, it never actually got to be a legal company. There was huge numbers of legal wrangles over this, and I think it was wound up in the early 1850s because just the idea of something like this happening was not something the government was prepared to countenance. They just said, well, it's illegal. So he performed that role through the 1840s. He was also at that time elected to the Chartist executive as one of the London members. These were hotly contested seats, so it wasn't just a sort of sinecure. So we can take it that he was some kind of political leader of the Chartists, i.e. the radical part of the London working class in the 1840s. Again, a lot more research is really needed on this. And it can be done. The main Chartist paper, the Northern Star, has been digitised. It's available free online. You can download it. It's in 6-point for those of you that know about typefaces. That's really small. Clearly, you can make it a bit bigger, but you need an enormous computer screen then to be able to actually read more than a small bit of the article. So that's work that I think a number of people have engaged on. Again, I might just come back to that, but clearly we do know a bit about it. He left apparently no written record. Or none that's been discovered anyway. I think as history moves on, I think we're becoming a bit sceptical about whether there was no written record, whether it's lost or is sitting somewhere where somebody hasn't come across it, because he was a skilled craftsman. To be, in effect, the secretary of the National Land Company would have required a considerable amount of written work. So, there may well be something that's uncovered, but we haven't got it at the minute, so we don't know in as much detail as we might like. But we do know that in the revolutionary year of 1848, Cuffay came to play quite a significant role. He was the organiser of the Chartist demonstration on the 10th of April, Monday the 10th of April 1848 on Kennington Common, which is the world's first ever photograph of a demonstration was taken. You can Google that if you haven't seen it. And so he did all the backroom kind of stuff. He wasn't one of the speakers. Herein lies one of the great conundrums of his life and how he's been treated by history since. We don't know. He was unhappy that the procession from Kennington Common to Parliament with the latest Chartist petition was called off by Fergus O'Connor, the leader of Chartism. He wanted to continue the procession and to face down the troops and indeed soldiers who were blocking the bridges over the river. He did, I believe, actually participate in an attempt to get across the bridge with some breakaway section of Chartist demonstration, but it rained. This is So it didn't work. This is one of those things that happens. But he was intent on pressing on, and the Chartists had an assembly that was meeting around this time in London, and afterwards you can find records in the Northern Star of him saying it's a waste of time complaining about how the press failed to report this demonstration properly. It's a waste of time petitioning the Queen or anybody else about the vote. We just need to press on in a militant way and demand the vote. This was not popular with Fergus O'Connor, who was a middle-class leader of some wealth, as we may notice sometimes people in the Labour movement do tend to be. Fergus O'Connor wrote about Cuffay. I'll come to this in a second. So we don't know what happened. Well, we may be able to find out some more, but again, it requires a lot of painstaking research. Chartism, that was only the beginning of Chartism in 1848. There were a number of challenges to the government. June, in particular, 1848, there was a considerable challenge. Not so, certainly in London, but in Bradford, it was almost sort of, Chartism almost managed to take control of the local government for a period around the 12th of June 1848. We don't really know what Cuffay was doing then, but by August, he had become involved in some way with an attempt at armed revolt in central London in Seven Dials, which for those of you that are familiar with the Covent Garden area is now quite a well-to-do upmarket. It's where the Ivy restaurant is, for example, for those that spend their time watching MasterChef. But it wasn't then. It was a very run-down working class. So the attempt at revolt was uncovered. The spies had infiltrated the movement and so on. Cuffay was one of those tried, and you can find, I'm sure we'll hear his speech from the dock, but he was sentenced to be transported to Van Diemen's Land, now Tasmania, and it took about a year to get out there in the ship, but he was out there by November 1849, I think. So what O'Connor wrote about Cuffay during his trial was that he could be depended upon absolutely. He was completely trustworthy and a competent person, which is why he was running the National Bank Company. But O'Connor thought that his politics were not to be trusted. He felt that he'd become mixed up with people that were militant, who were themselves subject to provocations by government spies. These are one of the things that historians ponder over. There's a new book, which is actually a novel, really, but it's well as a read. I'm sure you can find it in various ways, by Catherine Howe on Chartism and London Chartism in 1848. It's not an expensive book, it's paperback. And she takes the view that, and there's certainly a case to us, that Cuffay was part of a tradition of militant activity and an armed tradition, which there certainly was in Britain. 1848 was probably the last on the English mainland. Of course, there was the episode in Kent, which people know of, in 1838, Battle of Boston Wood. But he may have been involved in that. He may have been, significantly to the left of mainstream Chartism, but representative of a significant section of Chartism in London. So these kind of things are still being debated. It's a question now, 150 years after his death, about how he's remembered and why he's remembered, why he wasn't remembered. So in 1848, the Times referred to Cuffay and Chartism as the black man and his party. Now, what does that mean? Well, we don't really know, obviously, because we don't know why the person wrote it. It could just be seen as a racist comment, although we need to be careful about the racism as a category probably wasn't quite in the same way quite at that time. It may be, and again, this is work that's being done now, and the Black Lives Matter movement has provoked more of it, I'm pleased to say, that there were significant numbers of black Chartists in London. We don't really know. We know there were a few, and it may be that that it was a reference to that. It may, however, have been a reference to the fact that Cuffay was known to be the militant leader of London Chartism and a person of note to be mentioned in that way. So that's the reading native will do it. But I think what happened afterwards was historians saw that, mainstream historians saw that, and just took that as meaning he was a person of no great consequence. And until the late Peter Fryer wrote Staying Power about the history of Black Britons, very little, in fact nothing was known about Cuffay. Peter Fryer was the person that really introduced him again to history and put him back into where his rightful place as a significant figure in British working class history. And since then, there have been sort of struggles to try and make sure that that is in some way officially noticed or commemorated. So 10 years ago, I did a Radio 4 programme with Lord Bill Morris about Cuffay, and from that stemmed pressure to put up a plaque in the Strand in London, which was near where Cuffay lived, and indeed one of his sidelines performed on the stage in theatres. We don't know that much about that, but that is in Martin Hoyle's book, which is available from bookmarks, and somebody's put in the chat there as well, worth a read. It's the most recent account, really, of Cuffay, and it's very well researched. But it hasn't happened. The owners of the property just refused to give permission. Authorities were not interested in doing it. So 10 years on, we're no further forward in getting a plaque or any form of commemoration to this significant black figure in British history in London. I understand that you're making some good progress in Medway at last, and that's great news to hear, because certainly there should be a commemoration of Cuffay in Medway. But in summary, there should be something to mark him and bring him to notice of a wider public. The interesting thing as we mark the 150th anniversary of William Cuffay is there's still so much that we don't know about him. There's still so much that we need to try and understand exactly what his politics were, because when you look at his why he objected to the way that the leaders of Chartism were trying to get the vote in 1848 remains absolutely relevant to today, in terms of, well, is it really worth petitioning the Queen or Parliament about something? Or shouldn't we just try and crack on with organising and doing it ourselves? I mean, these are things that are discussed now. It's not just 150 years or 170 years ago. So great to see that there's people who are interested, and let's see if we can make William Cuffay and what he stood for rather better known on this 150th anniversary of his death.
Thank you very much, Keith. And one of the key points, basically, for me, is knowing that not only did he have an impact on working class, majority of us here tonight that has joined this, we are classified as working class. He's also the first person to organize a working class political group, making a difference. The question I always ask is, 150 years has gone, and we're still remembering all the good things that he has done. The question for us now is, as we're here today, and especially for people from the BME community and our allies, the question is, in this season of Black Lives Matter, what are we doing to stand out, to make that difference, to be that voice that is needed in our community? Are we ready to take the forefront and be leading and championing the cause for diversity and the cause for and fight against social injustice? That is the question we need to be asking ourselves. 150 years when we are gone, what will people be saying about us? What is the question? What is the legacy that we're leaving behind? William Cuffay has left a good legacy, and that's why we're here talking about him tonight. We're going to be asking ourselves, what kind of legacy are we going to be leaving behind after we have passed on? Are we going to be sitting at the back bench and just looking and not doing anything, or complaining and whining and not doing anything? That is not what William Cuffay did 150 years ago. So we need to take our stand. We need to be that strong voice like William Cuffay did, and we need to take that legacy and carry on with it. So thank you so much, Keith, for what you have said, and thank you for everyone who has joined us here tonight. This is one of our best events, in this time. So moving along swiftly, we want to find out more about what Chattism is then and compare it to what it is, now. So I'm going to introduce a very good friend of mine. Not only is she my very good friend, she's also the first civic Lord Mayor of Liverpool. She is into so many things in developing, people in Liverpool. She is at the forefront of fighting social injustice in Liverpool. She is leading on race and equality for people in Liverpool. And she is none other than Anna Rothery, the first Black, Liverpool mayor. So let's give her a round of applause and let's welcome her.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, yeah. I mean, we're listening about William Cuffay, and it strikes me that 150 years later and we've come full circle. And there's a couple of things that we need to do in this conversation in terms of unpicking how Black leaders actually fit into a framework or a structure that is, to some degree, quite alien to what we need to achieve. And so when they described William Cuffay as the Black man and his party, it was probably because the leaning towards where William Cuffay wanted to be was so far removed from what had been seen up until that point in time in terms of political movement, organising and change. And this is a dilemma that stays with us. It's a constant dilemma. As a Black woman trying to function within a structure that is not predominantly Black, it is predominantly white, and we have to take that as a given. Sometimes you find yourself at odds with what people are trying to achieve. And sometimes we are leaders in our field because the things that we flag up in terms of our human rights and our employment rights it always tends to sort of stream out, and it impacts on other people's lives in a very positive way. And you find this in terms of movements. Liverpool's really well known for starting movements around equality, inclusion, and recognition and representation. And so a movement that may start within a Black community, the ripple effect and how it impacts on all working class and all union members and charters, modern day charters, etc. It has a really positive impact. But the one thing that I've gleaned from this is that the one thing that is a constant that doesn't change is the way that media and colleagues can actually erase somebody of colour from history and also at the same time demonise them. And so, will we ever know in terms of his guilt, what role did he play? Was it this role that is depicted? He wanted to take up arms and threaten the monarchy, etc. Or was it a part and parcel of the times? I mean, he was a radical thinker. I mean, I don't think that's open for debate. He was quite radical in the way he wanted to do things, which also meant he was a threat. He was somewhat of a threat to the political movement of the time. And even for some of our most radical thinkers in the time, he probably went that step beyond in terms of the things that he wanted to achieve, and more so, in the manner that he would go about achieving it. And so it may seem like a huge threat because he probably has a limited amount of patience, because for every change that we see as a collective, the impact from that change seems to be a greater and a more positive impact on our white counterparts than it is on us as Black people who are part and parcel of a cause or a movement. So, maybe that's what led to his way of thinking in terms of being that extra, bit more radical. I think in terms of, it's undisputed, he had a real keen passion for employment rights, etc. And now we have come full circle because, we have a situation now where we've never had so much insecurity in terms of employment and employment rights, with 0-hour contracts and the biggest threat being automation. And so there was a great transition in terms of Cuffay's time. The threat then was around the Industrial Revolution, etc. So now we've got a similar threat in terms of automation that is going to impact on many people. But, the one thing that I will say is that when we look at employment rights, it tends to be, people from the Black community who suffer disproportionately because, they always seem to be the ones that lose their jobs before anybody else, or are redeployed or have to reapply for their jobs, etc., more so than anybody else. And we've got reports to that effect. So that's not just me, arriving at that conclusion. It's borne out by various reports that we've had over the years. And so, when you're looking at those things, then that means that you have to have a more sort of radical response than the status quo, because the gains for the status quo are given gains. You can see the tangible gains. However, how they impact on a Black man even today in modern Britain, as opposed to 150 years ago, the disparities would be huge across the board. But also, I think what's shown from Cuffay is that although he was, sent to Tasmania and was, sent away rather than being, a threat of life imprisoned here, when he had the opportunity to return to the UK, he chose to stay in Tasmania. And that for me also gives you some insight into why he may have chosen to stay in Tasmania. Maybe he found a group of like-minded people out in Tasmania who had, the same kind of leaning or the same kind of position that he had. And maybe he was just ahead of his time in the UK. And maybe his train of thought and his way of thinking was just that little bit, just a little bit out there for what was going on in that point in time. So in terms of today, bringing up to modern day, and Keith, you mentioned about Black Lives Matters and the impact on Black Lives Matters now. And so we are seeing, again, another rise, and we know about this. This comes in peaks and troughs. When you look at the sigmoid curve, we know when there's an economic decline, it is usually the Black community that suffers the most. And when I use the word Black, I mean that in the political sense, encompassing all cultures and faiths. But we know historically that whenever there's any instability in terms of the economy, we see this knock-on effect where we see a rise of the far right, we see a rise of racism and discrimination. And but the fact is that we've seen this historically, so we should know how we should be dealing with it. I think the difference in terms of what's happened in recent months is that during COVID and the lockdown, I think, many of us have been, at home, away from the workplace, separated from families and had an awful lot of time on our hands and quite solitary time as well. And I think what that's enabled us to do is to tap into our emotional intelligence and start to ponder and unpick things like racism. What does racism actually mean? I mean, prior to COVID, we had many conversations about racism and discrimination, and and even the killing of people, men and women, not just in the US, here in the UK and globally. And my take on that was that people would, they'd stop for a moment and say, "Isn't this awful?" and then swiftly move on. Nobody wanted to really have a conversation or a debate about that. I think since we've been in the lockdown with COVID, what's happened, because people have been able to tap into that AI, they've continued to talk and discuss about what does racism actually mean and discrimination, and how does that impact on Black people. And so we're being forced, rightly so, being forced into making massive changes in terms of policy, structure, frameworks, etc. And all the things that Cuffay was really passionate about. He was like, well, will we actually see change of the magnitude we need to see, by, doing the same old tried practices and still getting the same old tried results. So maybe that was one of the reasons why he was, off on tangents on his own way of thinking and thinking that, this is just, insanity because we keep getting the same results because we keep doing things in the same manner. When you talk about putting a plaque up for William Cuffay, I totally agree. The big debate now, certainly in Liverpool, Bristol, and probably most of the cities and towns up and down the UK, is about, street names and statues, and really, how they came about. And that was a very different time that we lived in, when, money, finance was respected. People could have anything named after them. The bank account was big enough. But is that future-proof for us? Is that something that we want to, applaud and put down in posterity for everybody? I don't think it is. Now I think we're a much more sophisticated and mature group of individuals that, what we actually respect is not wealth. It is about the altruistic ways of people's commitment to humanity and philanthropic and beneficial aims, but not that come on the back of enslavement and the money that was taken from slavery. And so, there's a huge debate around the plaques. In Liverpool, the mayor has just appointed a woman called Tracy Gord as the chief executive of Steve Biko Housing, very well respected black woman, leader in her field, and she's going to chair the Race Equality Task Force. And then we've also got a committee being set up to look at street names and look at plaques also. And and this is where it gets complicated, because people may think, it's just a straight decision between do we have a plaque and do we take the statues down? And it's not, because, what tends to happen with black communities, we're almost treated as a homogenous group. We're not a homogenous group. We're made up of many different people who share the same skin, So when we have conversations, these blanket statements are often made about, do we want this? Yes, we do. No, we don't. It's not as cut and dried as that. It's a wide variation on opinions, views and belief systems. And we need to have this discussion and debate about not who, but even before we get to the who do we want to depict? Who do we want to, put a plaque up for? But, we have to ask the question is, do we even, and we need to have that conversation, and that needs to be an open and honest and frank conversation. And it has to be done in a way where everybody's views and opinions are listened to. And only then will we arrive at a position where we get to the point about naming plaques after certain individuals. And that is another complex issue, because there are so many people that have literally been erased from history. People like William Cuffay, who were at the forefront of many things historically, but we don't know a great deal about them because they have purposely been erased from history and certainly haven't been taught in the school curriculum, etc., like that. And so we need to start unpicking the contributions that were made by people just like William Cuffay. And, the other thing is that we are not the sum total of enslavement. We need to be looking at our black community in their entirety and looking at the contributions that we've made to society, the amazing contributions over, many, many decades and hundreds of years, and looking at things like the contributions we've made to medicine and architecture, looking at our history in terms of kings and queens, the Black Egyptians, the ancient kingdom of Kush and things like that. So we almost have to rewrite our history from an Afrocentric point of view. And maybe then we can deliberate about what plaques go where and whether we actually have a plaque or a statue, or whether we keep a statue and we tell the truth about the history of that. But that's not for me to, to come to any conclusion on, because I'm a firm believer in consultation. I think just in terms of William Cuffay, there are many, many hundreds of William Cuffays in the world, and nobody knows a great deal, or they only know what history chooses to write about them. And so we may never, ever get to the bottom of William's motivations. But I'm really so pleased that his story is actually on the agenda now.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thoroughly enjoy that. And thank you for your contribution. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being a leader. And thank you for all the leaders that we have here tonight and leaders in making. We do know that we are marching forward and we are making a difference, and we will continue to make that difference Our next speaker is Mikey. Is a local person, is actually a Chatham son as well as William Cuffay. Is a local artist and is been at the forefront of Black Lives Matter here in Medway. Mikey has been a source of inspiration to a lot of us and many young people, many young Black people here in Medway, and is doing amazing work, supporting, stand up, to racism here in Medway, and working with Medway Trade Council as well, and just being a community activist. So I'm handing over to Mikey.
Good evening, people. So what I'm going to be doing is, I'm not very good at public reading, but I'm going to read you William Cuffay's speech at his trial, all right? His last speech at his trial. I say you have no right to sentence me. Although this trial has lasted a long time, it has not been a fair trial, and my request to have a fair trial to be tried by my equals has not been complied with. Everything has been done to raise prejudice against me. The press of this country, and I believe the press of other countries too, have all done in their power to smother me with ridicule. I had no pity. I asked for no mercy. I expect to be convicted and didn't think anything else. But I don't want any pity. No, I pity the government. I pity the Attorney General for convicting me by means of such base characters. The Attorney General should be called the Spy General for using such men in a disgrace to the government, but they only exist by such means. I am quite innocent. The locality to which I belong never proved of any violence of this sort or sent any delegates to any such meetings. And you will find proven in the trials of my fellow prisoners who have not yet been tried. I have a right to complain of the other spy, Davis, being kept back until the last moment, and he read the evidence of Miss Crete with so many aliases. As to me having a loaded pistol, I only carried one for my own protection as my life was being threatened. That is all I say at present, except that this is no more than what I have expected for some time. I have certainly been an important character of the Chartist movement. I laid myself out for something of this sort from the first. I know a good many men of good moral character are suffering in prison, but only advocating the cause of the Charter. But however, I do not despair of it being carried out yet. There are many victims. I'm not anxious for martyrdom, but I feel what I have gone through this week. I have fortitude to bear any punishment your lordship may inflict on me. I know my cause is good. I have self-approving conscience that will bear me up against anything, and that will bear me up even against the scaffold. Therefore, I think I can endure any punishment proudly. I feel no disgrace in being called a felon. This new Act of Parliament is disgraceful. I am proud to be the first victim of it after the glorious Mitchell. Every good act was set aside in Parliament. Everything that was likely to do any good to the working class was either thrown out or set aside, but a measure to restrain their liberties could be passed in a few hours. I am done, my lord.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We are going to be moving on to question and answer. One fantastic thing about tonight's event is we've got people from all over United Kingdom joining us from different parts of UK and also joining us internationally. It basically shows how important this is. From the poem that Mikey read for us, we know the fight for justice. It's not easy. The road to equality, the road to making a difference in a very positive way, the road to fighting inequalities is not an easy road. There will be persecution, but we have to persist. We cannot give up because he didn't give up. If the likes of, William Cuffay gave up, what's going to be happening to us tonight? If the likes of Nelson Mandela gave up, what's going to be happening to us tonight? We're going to be trolled, abused, where people are going to throw stones at us in any way. But we have to carry on. We have to persist. So I'm going to hand over to my co-chair, Sat, who has been coordinating the question. Welcome, Sat.
Okay, thank you, Lola. So we have a few questions from everyone who's joined us today. So feel free to answer this panel or who can best. First one's from Judy. Judy feels Cuffay's wife was unable to join him in Tasmania and ended up working in a workhouse in England. Is that true? Or does anyone know any more about that?
No, I don't think it is true. I think she took her quite some years to get out there. I think she was out there by the mid-1850s because obviously money had to be raised and so on. So it may well have been true for quite a period, but I think eventually he managed the job because, as Anna rightly said, Cuffay, although he was pardoned, declined to return to the UK. He may have felt even at a basic level that the weather was a bit better. It was in London, but of course he he went on and to organise. He was one of the founders, in fact, of the Australian Labour Movement, and therein lies a fascinating tale, which I'll come back to with one of the other questions.
This one's a similar one. Does anyone know if there's any descendants of Cuffay that are still alive?
Mark Gregory will know. He's the Australian guy that's I think we'll be hearing from. And interestingly, in the Australian historians, I suppose, socialist historians and others have also been trying to get some kind of memorials that Cuffay erected. I think with a fairly similar result so far. But there will certainly be stuff in Australia to mark the 150th anniversary of the death. Cuffay, I think, is a bit better known in Australia, perhaps ironically, than he is in Britain. I think from memory, he has been discussed and debated in Australian Parliament from time to time. But yeah.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Another question for you, Keith. We know that Cuffay worked for Ackworth and Matthews Taylors at the far west end of Chatham High Street, which is ironically most next to Hawkins Almhouse. But do we know where he lived in Chatham? And that's from Robert.
One can Google Wikipedia, but the source is Bruce Albury's book, 2015, I think, from on Medway, suggests that he was born in an area now called Old Brompton. So that may mean more to many in the meeting than does to me. But we don't have a great deal of detail about his early life, or at least we don't at the moment. As I said, I wouldn't rule out that there is something, a memoir or record somewhere. But at the minute, that's not extant.
From Rachel, she asks, with the loss of Labour as a militant force, do we need a people's opposition that brings people together with some major aims like the Chartist movement did? Are we at a crossroad for workers like the 1840s?
Well, I think that any movement that tackles injustice, if it's not being dealt with by governments, local governments, then there is always room for movements, and rightly so. Because the thing is about the Chartist movement historically and what we see today in terms of what we've got, is that it's about focus. Where do you put your focus? And what everybody seems to be preoccupied with today is everybody wants to be a politician. I don't quite understand that, why that is. But that means you're draining resources away from movements who've always taken that proactive role in terms of lobbying for change, which I find is equally as important, if not more important, than being a representative. The ability to lobby for change through a number of ways of doing that, through a number of structures and groups and committees, is really powerful. So, yeah, I would say yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can. I mean, I was saying, we're usually at a crossroads in the British Labour movement of some kind, but it just depends which crossroads we manage to reach. But the thing about Cuffay historically, and this is to understand, we talked about whether he was, a revolutionary or was part of an armed tradition or whatever. This is the beginning of the British Labour movement. Like, we haven't had the TUC, the Labour Party, all that comes from it for its strengths and weaknesses. At this stage, it's not known what strategy is going to work. Okay, could it be this? Could it be that? We don't. The only way we're going to find out is to give it a go. So we get opts out of capitalism with the land company. Maybe we should try armed revolt. Maybe we should try peaceful petitioning. Maybe we should try mass demonstrations. All the gamut of possible things are being tried out here, and it's not necessarily clear that which one at this stage is going to be the one that works. Now, ultimately, Charters was defeated. History takes the course that we know it did, and we can't. I'm not a fan of counterfactual history, which is sort of, write the history you would like to have happened, than what did actually happen. So that's how it did happen. But we need to understand Cuffay in that sense. He's not somebody that's coming along and saying, you know what, well, the Labour Party hasn't worked. No, the Labour Party wasn't formed for many decades afterwards. So he wasn't thinking that. What he was thinking was, I want to get the vote for working people. How am I going to get it? What's going to be the best way that I'm going to be able to do that? And lots of other people were thinking the same, but not necessarily coming to the same conclusion about what was going to work. So you need to understand it in that sense, really. And you could argue, I think that that's the point the question is making, that we're again at a similar kind of moment now with the Black Lives Matters around climate change, huge challenges, and the question is, we know what the challenges are, we know what the issues are. How are we going to get change? What is going to work?
John says a similar point. He says we need to celebrate working class history. In Portsmouth, we want to celebrate the Spithead Mutiny and the involvement of the revolutionaries in the United Irishmen. William Cuffay needs a plaque and a statue. He was a revolutionary. He didn't think the ruling class could be won over by powerful arguments. He recognised we need to take what is ours by our numbers and force. I think the same applies today. The same applied to the Black Lives Movement. What do the panel think?
I think there's a wider point. I'll make it very briefly because it's really a separate meeting, but it's the 200th anniversary this year, February the 23rd, of the Cato Street Conspiracy, which was another attempt at armed revolt in central London off Edgware Road. It was just after the Peterloo Massacre in 1819, and a group of people, mainly Irish, there was a black man involved, and others with some history of radical activity and indeed armed activity in some cases. If the soldiers can cut down peaceful protesters at Peterloo and Manchester calling for the vote, we're going to surprise the cabinet at a dinner and cut their heads off. Okay. Now, I think we all know that this plan did not work. Okay, so they were surprised. Again, spies were involved, and they were hung, including the black conspirator. And the interesting here, and this is when you talk about, I don't expect many people on the call think that the murder of George Floyd somehow Black Lives Matter. So, better have a movement. Of course, it existed before. Lots of people were doing stuff, and there's a new book which actually was written and published earlier this year before Black Lives Matters arose, which talks about all the transatlantic links between radicalism, between Ireland, between the Caribbean, and how all these things are interconnected. And of course, this is Cuffay, isn't it? His father is a former slave who comes to Britain. Cuffay is a Chartist active in the centre of the imperial power, and then he ends up starting to build the Australian labour movement. You couldn't get a better way of understanding how it's not just Britain; it's a whole system of global links that go on here, both on their side and on ours.
I think in terms of the question, I mean, you talk about Black Lives Matters now in terms of, we are talking about it in terms of plaques and statues, but, really for me, you know, that is one piece of the conversation. It's not the full total of the conversation. You have to tackle systemic racism. We have to deal with the culture and psyche that still prevails to this day, that allows it to function within our everywhere. It transcends everything, whether it's faith, whether it's education, whether it's, you know, business, companies, political parties. You know, that is a big issue. And, you know, often we lose sight of that. And I think we're in danger of losing that sight as well with Black Lives Matter at the moment, because, you know, to take us away from the core issue of racism and discrimination and the huge disparities, it's probably easier for people to focus on plaques and statues. And whilst I, you know, think that there is a need for a focus on that because of the, you know, historical context and how they came about, I think there's a greater need for us to make some real, to eradicate racism from society and to make some real great changes in terms of our structures and how we actually work going forward. I mean, we know about, you know, young Black children not being able to access education. We know about our children being streamed into sink schools. We know about the lack of opportunities around employment for Black people. We know about accessing universities where, when you debate data around BAME figures, not my word and not the word used by the mainstream. You know, when we're talking about BAME numbers in our universities, it tends to be overseas students that will come to the UK, take their education and go wherever they go. And then you've got Black communities that sit on the doorstep of many great universities up and down the country and don't even access the education from there. So, you know, don't be distracted by plaques and statues, as important as they are. The bigger issue for me is about how do we change the way that we do things. I mean, we have these conversations over and over again. You know, where's the real change? I mean, this is what I'm working on in Liverpool is about making change. It's about working with universities, and it's about saying, well, okay, you know, what are you going to do to attract people from our communities? It's about talking to employers and having those difficult conversations with them and accessing the information about what's the barrier to employment. You know, why are you consistently failing to recruit from Black communities? What's the barrier that's getting in the way? Let's have an open and honest conversation and let us together work out a workable way forward where you can rectify those problems. And I must admit that, you know, talking to the businesses, and this may be something to do with the fact that we're leaving Europe or we've left Europe and we're looking to trade in other, you know, countries than we have done historically. So, you know, rather than the European countries and rather than, you know, China and places like that where we've traded with for decades, we're now having to look at trade in other countries like the African continent and India. You know, but the thing is that we have got a wealth of knowledge and education here in the UK within our Black communities. People who speak your languages, people who've got connections with the African continent and India. Why are we not utilising that? Why are we not ensuring that there's employment for people? We're looking at a new phase of doing business in this country. We're looking at a new phase of trade and a new phase of employment. So why are we not utilising the skills, knowledge and attitudes that we've got here in the UK at this present time?
I'm Carol Stewart, chairperson of Medway African and Caribbean Association, and I think just to pick up on some of the issues around not just about terminology, but about people hashtagging Black Lives Matters and marching around Black Lives Matters, that actually showing what Black Lives Matters is, you know, and I've seen lots of organisations, councils putting up these banners saying, you know, Black Lives Matters, but actually not really doing anything to demonstrate it in the workplace.
Exactly.
You know, we held a summit last week, and, you know, we're saying we're not talking about Black Lives Matters. What we're talking about here is systemic and institutional racism, right? That is the long and short of it. You know, we're talking about racism. It starts with education. It starts with the individual. You know, someone in the chat there talked about, you know, having white allies. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be working with our white allies, but what I've seen happen and what my experience has been is that that people, when we're walking side by side with some of our white peers and white allies, is that then the black voices then get seen as the antagonistic ones, and we get ignored. You know, what we need is to be uplifted and to put more into the forefront without feeling like, you know, that we can't speak for ourselves, we can't do for ourselves. You know, much of the portrayal that we see about black slavery and oppression shows a white savior coming in to save us, and that's not what we're looking. That's not what I'm talking about. So I just think we just need to start to reframe it and understand what it is we're talking about, and stop making a science out of something that really isn't that scientific. It's just so simple. And here we are 300-400 years later, still having the same debate, and it was really concerning.
The question is from Vince Maple, and it's for the panel, picking up on the chat. What do the panel think of the effectiveness of statistical language of BAME or BME language matters, as we know only too well from the Medway Tory councillors last Thursday?
I think the language used is the most divisive language that's ever been used, and wholly inappropriate. It's you know, it's an insult. I mean, what is you know, ethnic and minority? What does that actually mean? You know, I mean, I grew up in the 60s with, you know, Angela Davis and the Black Panthers, and I embraced my blackness, and I wear it proudly. And, you know, and reclaimed it, you know, from a word that had been made a bad word by our white counterparts. But, you know, I love my blackness and I celebrate it. And I certainly don't describe myself as BME or BAME or any of the other acronyms that get thrown around, because I don't understand what that represents. It alienates us as black people from mainstream. It's a derogatory term, and you know, it's wholly inappropriate, and it shouldn't be used. And I challenge it where I see it, and I think many of us do that, and we have to get rid of it. But you know, I also am a firm believer in self-definition, and not everybody defines as black. That's my chosen choice, but not everybody defines themselves as being black. So, you know, it's not, again, a one-size-fits-all. It's what people are comfortable. I mean, our younger community tend to be using people of colour, you know, brown and black people. You know, there's a whole host of things coming up at the moment being flagged up in terms of the language. But, you know, my position is get rid of them. You know, it's totally inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Well, I'm in Cardiff tonight. I live in Tottenham, of course. So, and you know, the minute there are active campaigns in Tottenham around tasering, you know, some people have seen the case of somebody that was pursued by the police and ended up paralysed. The police officers are currently suspended, and Section 60 stop and search, which is most nights in Tottenham. Section 60 is in place. In fact, it was in place last night, and you know, as I was wandering back from the local hospital, police phone past me and just ignored me because I'm a white man wearing a suit as matter. But if I wasn't, they would have been out. This is the reality. So, in terms of naming, this is the point, isn't it? So, is it William Cuffay, the Chartist leader, or is it, as the Times said, the black man and his party? The name is important. The name is important. That's why when George Floyd was murdered by racist police in America, a lot of that was, say his name. He's a man. He's a real man. His name. He's got a name. He's not just a black man. Now, how people then define themselves, of course, is entirely up to them. I agree. It's self-identification. But understanding people as people and opposing racist attempts to kind of stereotype. And, of course, that was part of what was happening with Cuffay, I think. No part of the black man and his party. Not William Cuffay, the experienced leader of Chartism with a long history of activism. No, the black man. Okay? So the stereotyping, he clearly, from his speech from the top, he did see himself partly in that way, and that's how he identified as himself. But I think we need to get, you know, beyond that, to look at people and to oppose those who seek to divide on the basis of race or gender or sexuality or whatever it is, because that's not going to be the way forward for us.
I also think it's about reclaiming our blackness and putting a positive spot. It's about reclaiming our blackness and seeing it as a positive, because it's something that's been demonized from, throughout decades and decades, as though it's almost like it's a dirty word. It's not a dirty word. I'm proud to be black. Yeah, let's all be black, and let's all get rid of fame and BMI.
Thank you so much for all the questions and answers. There is still more question on the chat feed, but I'm quite sure we're going to take those questions away, and we will try as much as possible to answer them on our Facebook page, which is the Medway Trade Council Facebook page. We will try and we will try and answer some of those questions there, so you can catch up on that, at a later stage. And one key thing that keeps jumping out here is self-identification. I've always believed that BAME is the wrong terminology. Like what Anna said, I am black and I'm proud to be black. The issue that affects black people is different from the issue that affects Asian people, and it's different from the issue that affects the minority ethnic group. So lumping it together is just an excuse not to deal with individual issues, but rather try and just scrape it on the surface. And we have to carry on working together in unity, because in unity, there is strength. So as we move on swiftly, we would like to carry on talking about, having more questions and having more debate. But like what Ivor said, because of time, we're going to move on swiftly. I will be introducing the Secretary of Medway Trade Union Council, a very hardworking man who is literally at the forefront of, fighting for racism, fighting for social injustice, and basically being the voice for the voiceless in our community. And that is the person called Steve Wilkins, a very nice gentleman. Let's welcome Steve.
Right, thank you. Yes, I think what we learn from Cuffay is tremendously, and his story, how tremendously it's important for black history, it's important for working class history, and it's the same history. They're not something different. And it's, as Keith said at the beginning, he was by no means the only black chartist. There were other chartists, black chartists. We don't necessarily know their names, but there certainly were. And the point is that black people have been in Britain for centuries, and they've been part of the working class, certainly since even before Cuffay. And they've been part of the working class. They've been part of us for centuries. And they participated in struggles. They participated in the same all the struggles. They've been part of making the world we have today. The situation we have today, the rights we have today, have been partly done. Black people have been absolutely part of that, and working class struggle has been a part of that. Now, the importance of what they were fighting for might not seem so much today, because we, when you look at Parliament, sometimes you think, oh God. But nevertheless, the fight for the vote was actually tremendous. Without that, many other things we wouldn't have. And it was what the Chartists actually did. I mean, we didn't have time to go into it, but people should look up the history of the Chartists. It was a fantastic movement, absolutely astounding, the things that they managed to achieve in the time that they had. And the fight, as we know, is going to go on. And again, as has been said, we are facing some really enormous challenges. Now, the campaign for Medway Trades Council, actually, for a long time, it has been our policy. We have wanted proper recognition for William Cuffay. Medway Council have recently announced it is their intention to put up a plaque, which is good, and that's jolly good. But we want a lot more than that, because, as people have said, plaques and statues, okay, they're nice to have and important that they are there amongst all the other statues and memorials. But what we want is Cuffay's story told. We want everybody to know about it. We want everybody to know about the Chartists. We want everybody to know about William Cuffay. We want everybody to know the involvement of black people in all our struggles. And that is bigger ask than just the council might think they're just going to stick up a plaque and that's okay, but it's not. That's not enough as far as we're concerned. What we want is for them to actively celebrate and promote what Cuffay did. In Medway, we have an annual festival for Will Adams, who was a sailor who was shipwrecked on the coast of Japan. Because he was a shipwright, he was able to show them how to build ships, and he helped build the navy. If you've seen the film Shogun, that's him. And we have a festival every year about him, but there is nothing about Cuffay, and we want everybody to actually know about Cuffay. And one of the things that we're going to do after this meeting is we are going to try and make a film to go in much deeper about the Chartists, about Cuffay. We would like to have it done by in time for Black History Month. I can't guarantee that will be the case, but that is certainly what we want to do. And I'd certainly like to thank all the speakers and everyone who's participated. And we've got more to come. So I'll shut up now and let's get on with it.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that. And if anyone is interested in joining the Medway Trade Union Council, please do not hesitate to contact us. We are more than, we are always looking for people to come in and be part of this active movement. So before we move on, there is a film that is coming up, or a message from, Australia, Tasmania, that we need to hear.
Thanks for inviting me to say a few words about William Cuffay and his remarkable leadership role in the developing workers' movement in Tasmania. It's great to see his anniversary being recognised in this way. In the spring of 1870, the Tasmanian newspaper, the Mercury, reported that a marked pauper's grave in Hobart held the remains of a convict who had just died in poverty, aged 82. That convict was William Cuffay, born in England in 1788, the year that the First Fleet brought the first convicts to Botany Bay. That Cuffay's grave was marked was unusual for a pauper, but then William Cuffay was a most unusual person, a man who from the time he arrived in the colony in 1849 came to play a remarkable role in Tasmania's political life. By the time he died, basic democratic reforms that he'd been promoting for half a century had been achieved. We know that Cuffay was well known and highly regarded at his death, yet he died as a pauper. 2 newspaper obituaries were published for him, one in Tasmania and one in New South Wales. In the Mercury in Tasmania, the obituary was headed, "Death of a Celebrity." The deceased availed himself within 16 or 18 years of many opportunities to express his strong political feelings. He particularly distinguished himself in the agitation for the amendment of the Masters and Servants Law in the colony, and being a fluent and effective speaker, was always popular with the working classes. He always went in strongly for the individual rights of working men. He would urge his right to complain by such characteristic expressions as fellow slaves, and I'm old, I'm poor, I'm out of work, I'm in debt, and therefore I have cause to complain. When he landed in Van Diemen's Land, he was already famous, and his arrival was reported in 5 newspapers. Of all the convicts on the transport ship, only Cuffay was mentioned by name. He was variously described as the Chartist ringleader and the famous Chartist. The Tasmanian newspaper reports of Cuffay help us understand just what an important activist he was. What was he like? The official Tasmanian record states that Cuffay was transported for sedition, convening a public meeting, and speaking at the time. The records provide the following bare description: trade, a tailor, Height, 4'11". Age, 61. Complexion, dark. Whiskers, grey. Visage, narrow. Forehead, high. Nose, broad. Mouth, large. Marks, rather bald. Thin bones, spine deformed. That was the official view. But equally revealing is the drawing of Cuffay by his cellmate William Dowling in Newgate Jail just before they were transported. Here he stands in front of a barred window, his hand in the waistcoat of his beautifully tailored suit. He's wearing an expression that seems to belie his predicament. His eyes twinkle, and there's a half smile, an air of great confidence. Maybe he knows that this drawing will later be smuggled out and used by his charter supporters to raise enough money to enable his wife, Mary Ann, to follow him to Tasmania. One of the most extraordinary revelations about Cuffay was just how quickly he managed to continue his political activity and began exercising leadership in the colony. In February 1851, after only a year in the colony and while still a convict, we find the Colonial Times reporting his involvement at a public meeting of the Free Trades Union, called to discuss transportation and the use of convict labour for public works. That meeting was part of a movement to cease transportation and also stop the exploitation of convict labour. The newspaper tells us that Mr. Cuffay was unanimously called to the chair and opened the meeting with a brief address, developing the principal objects of the meeting. Here we can see that the ticket of leave man, William Cuffay, a convict and political prisoner transported for life and only 15 months into his sentence, was already a respected and trusted member of the Hobart labour movement. The report also shows that organised workers in Tasmania, a large proportion of whom were ex-convicts or were related to convicts, played an important role in the anti-transportation movement. As the obituaries noted on his death, Cuffay and his supporters managed a most significant reform in Tasmania by insisting on changes to the hated and unfair Masters and Servants Act. By 1854, political debate in Tasmania was focused on amending that act. Cuffay had been a prominent opponent of the same type of law in Britain. Under his leadership, Tasmanian workers lobbied hard for it to be abolished, or at least amended, so that it was less biased in the employer's favour. Workers were particularly wary of its onerous punishments that included imprisonment. They referred to it, ironically, as the Masters Act, seeing nothing in it for the servant. The public campaign of meetings and petitions waged by Cuffay and other workers resulted in a much amended act that watered down the more draconian powers of employers over workers. Cuffay received a conditional pardon in 1854 and a free pardon restoring his full civil rights in 1857. Free at last, and by now in his early 70s, Cuffay continued to work in Hobart, where he and his wife, who had joined him in 1853, had elected to stay. Mary Ann Cuffay had been a recognised activist in her own right. Like her husband, she was not afraid to speak truth to authority. The London Times reports that she was present at William's trial in 1848. Mrs. Cuffay was among the crowd in the body of the court during part of the examination, but having ventured to express her views of the proceeding in two audible terms, she had to be put out by an officer. Cuffay never stopped organising around workers' rights. And in 1863, he's reported in the Mercury addressing a public meeting in the Theatre Royal in Hobart, agitating against a new tax. The newspaper reports that Mr. Cuffay would propose the resolution if nobody else would. He remembered that among the old radicals in England, it was considered that taxation without representation was a tyranny which should be resisted. Cheers. And therefore, they had headed their placard, taxation with representation. He would now move that in the opinion of this meeting, the bills now before the legislature for imposing additional taxes on the necessaries of life are in their provisions oppressive and unjust, are vicious in principle and opposed to progression and enlightened legislation. What is obvious in this speech is an example of Cuffay's wit and humour when he says, "These men have not fulfilled their promises. We have given them time, and what sort of measures have they produced? Why, they're like old eggs. They have been a long time in the process of incubation, and now they've turned out rotten." The local newspapers were drawn to Cuffay, recording his arguments and placing them before their readers. His campaigning voice, the voice of a working class leader, comes down to us clear and loud from 150 years ago. I'll finish where I began. When William Cuffay died a pauper in Brickfield's infirmary, 2 obituaries appeared in Australia. The second obituary, published in New South Wales, included these fitting words. During his better days, his company was much sought by his fellow labourers, as he was witty and full of anecdote. He always supported the people's side and opposed everything that tended to cripple the rights of the people. I would definitely have liked to known him.
Right, okay. That is actually a wonderful sum up from Australia, which is really fantastic. I just basically now want to say a big thank you to everyone who have joined us tonight. I know that you have a busy schedule, just, you know, we're all busy, but you've left your busy schedule to be part of what we're doing tonight. That speaks volume. And I also want to say a big thank you to all my union colleagues, because I can see them online, and my local sisters and those who have come from far, who have joined us from, you know, outside of Medway as well. A big thank you to you. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to all the organizers. We have really done a good job. Ivor, thank you for being our technical guy who is behind the scene, making everything is running smoothly. Thank you, Sat, for coordinating all the questions and for making sure that the feed is actually, the message on the chat is actually also being responded to. Thank you, Steve. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And please don't forget, we're all in it together. We're all in it together, leading by example and ensuring that the voiceless are given a voice. Thank you so much. And good night from all of us.
My name is William Cuffay. By trade I am a tailor. I've been called a yellow jacket, a chartist and a traitor. But I have no shame, no convict stain has left its mark on me. For I am that rarest of all birds, an English revolutionary.
For he is the rarest of all birds, an English revolutionary.
My name is William Cuffay. My father was a slave who worked in the plantations till abolition saved. It is the British Empire's boast that slavery's done away. They should come down to Van Diemen's Land, where the poor work for no pay.
They should come down to Van Diemen's Land, where the poor work for no pay.
My name is William Cuffay. I am an agitator for making war upon the Queen, transported to Australia. But a woman I would never strike, so it hurt my heart full sore. Oh, it's not that dear young girl I hate, it's everything that she stands for.
Oh, it's not that dear young girl he hates, but everything that she stands for.
My name is William Cuffay, though I be old and poor. I fought the fight for each man's right to make our country's law. On charges of sedition, I was sent across the sea. Now I walk the streets of Hobart as an English revolutionary.
Now he walks the streets of Hobart as an English revolutionary.